So good news in Victoria in particular on the infection front, as we expected with all these measures in place, but still inanity when it comes to the management of Victoria and, to be frank, the way other states are also treating Victorians. For instance, I know of people who have jobs waiting for them in South Australia. They're looking to move there permanently from Victoria, exactly what South Australia needs, and they're not allowed to do it. Not allowed to head over and isolate for 2 weeks and then live there. Not allowed to be tested before they go and tested again when they arrive and settle. Just not allowed to go into another state from Victoria. Banned from parts of their own country. Banned from taking their money and their vote of confidence across the border into a state that desperately needs it. Just another example of the inanity going on in this country. But that's what South Australia is doing to Victorians. What about what Victoria's own government has been doing to its citizens? Let's start with the curfew. It has gone at last. But there's so much open. People have been telling me in Victoria they're pleased the curfew's gone, of course, but it doesn't make much difference because there's not much open anyway after 9 o'clock. But I think it's an important, horrible infringement that has been lifted from Melburnians at least. Now, you know, I've opposed the curfew from the outset. I always said it was over the top. And we've also shared with you how the Chief Health Officer in Victoria did not recommend the curfew. The Police Commissioner also said neither he nor any of his officers recommended a curfew to Premier Daniel Andrews, but the Premier himself said he couldn't even remember who came up with the idea. So then when Andrews scrapped the curfew yesterday, we heard this from his health officer.
In reflecting on the obligations of the Victorian Charter and the Public Health and Wellbeing Act and the issue of proportionality, it's my view, and it was the public health team's view, that the curfew is not a proportionate measure to have in place going forward.
You don't say. Not a proportionate measure. That was clear all along. From the evidence, it seems Sutton has known this all along too. But Daniel Andrews dreamed up a curfew at some stage and Melburnians have had to put up with it for almost 2 months. This is an unbelievable abuse of democratic power. So what about schools? What about the way school kids in Victoria have had their school year disrupted far worse than any other state, ruining a crucial year's education for hundreds of thousands of students and creating all sorts of other trauma through social dislocation? Well, we've been onto this issue and the expert medical advice repeatedly since earlier in the year.
I still have the firm belief that for schools, the evidence that closing schools helps with the epidemic is fairly weak, and indeed the disruptive nature of having schools closed is a concern to me.
We've had plenty of medical advice, for instance, that schools are a safe option, a place to keep kids organised and focused, coached on hygiene, away from vulnerable people and continuing with their education.
And all the evidence in Australia as well as overseas is that children under the age of 15 in particular relatively rarely get this infection. It's not that they don't get it, but if they do get it, they seem to be not transmitters of the infection. You know, you can keep schools open at a low risk to other students, but even to others.
And that's just a sample. As you know, we've been on this with the expert medical advice since February, March, April. Now, Daniel Andrews is allowing primary school kids to go back to school, but not until the second week of next term. He says the schools need time to get ready. They've had all year to get ready. Sounds like his policies are being decided by the teachers' union. Anyway, the turnaround by the Labor government is being attributed in part to research conducted by the Murdoch Children's Research Institute on young people and the virus. The Australian reported today that new research finding that young children are less likely to transmit coronavirus than adolescents has paved the way for more than 500,000 Victorian primary school students to return to classrooms ahead of schedule. Well, surely it's not ahead of schedule. Surely the point is they never should have been turned away from school.
Prep to grade 6, special school students and VCE VCAL students will return to on-site learning in the week beginning the 12th of October. There are some medical issues and some research that's been done about infectivity amongst smaller kids, younger kids.
They found that
primary school children are at a lower risk of getting and spreading infection. And this isn't to say that they can't get infected or they never get unwell, but their risk is lower. And it's particularly important when community rates of infection are lower, as they are at the moment.
Yes, 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 but that information is not new. Yes, more research continues to prove this up, but the medical advice on this has been clear for 6 months or more. This is a disgrace. Daniel Andrews and others point to falling infections and use that to claim vindication for all of their measures. No, the test of managing this virus is turning down infections, controlling the spread of the disease while creating as little social trauma as possible elsewhere. When it comes to the curfew and keeping students from schools, Daniel Andrews has inflicted enormous pain on his citizens without the medical arguments behind him, and they have delivered zero or negligible gain.